Yesterday saw coloured citizens take to the streets looking to highlight the ongoing violence and killings in coloured communities across South Africa. In recent months, Gauteng residents in predominantly coloured communities, including Westbury, Nuclear, Reiger Park and Eldorado Park, witnessed a spate of deadly gang violence. Residents say they are tired of empty promises from both government and police. We're now joined by the chairpersons in the Gauteng Provincial Government, Legislature, Bishop Dalton Adams, and political analyst and writer Tara Roos. Bishop Adams, good evening. I'm going to start the conversation with you. The protest was dubbed Coloured Lives Matter, which I would assume concomitantly would presume that coloured lives currently don't matter. Take us into the heart of the organizing around this protest and why it's called a Coloured Lives Matter protest.
Thank you so much, Oliver. Thank you for the opportunity, and also for your viewers. And Tara Roos, also welcome on the platform. Let me start by saying I'm not the organizer of this event. I joined in solidarity with predominantly the Patriotic Alliance, and one has to give credit for that. And they called this, and we felt this community, because we've been involved in these challenges for years with regards to gang violence and standing up against drugs. So what happened yesterday was for us to make a statement to say that coloured lives matter, but where I stand, I say coloured lives matter too. So it can't just be about coloured lives, but Oliver, one has to bring it into the context. If you look at what's happening in coloured communities, I think the people in the coloured communities are feeling that they have been terribly neglected. They've been isolated and marginalized. They feel that that's the voice of the people. They felt so by government. They feel so by the SABC, you correctly have said. And that's why all over the country you found that all our people wearing black came out and said that coloured lives matter too. We want to ask the other races, the whites, the blacks and the Indians, to have patience with us at this stage, because we want to send a clear message that the neglect is very systemic here in our communities, Oliver.
Perhaps let me ask this more pointedly. Do you believe, Bishop Adams, that coloured people in coloured communities are particularly and specifically neglected as well as marginalized?
Yes, I would say so. I think there is a change, but let me take it as terms of reference, Oliver. The previous premier in Gauteng, David Makura, even the president himself, various high political and government leaders have said, actually articulated the fact verbatimly that coloured people are being neglected. And it's not only government, it's also private sector that is not actually assisting what's happening in coloured communities. So the sentiment and the call from the coloured community is that they are being neglected. You can see it in the infrastructure, you can see the rollout of programs, skills development in education, the schools. And I am in the legislature, and I have made many calls for government to come in and help so that we can change the trajectory of the neglect that has actually taken hold of our coloured communities.
Tara, I want to bring you into the conversation. Do you agree with the view advanced by Dalton that coloured people in coloured communities are particularly neglected as well as marginalized?
I'm going to have to disagree. There is absolutely no empirical evidence to suggest that coloured South Africans are uniquely or disproportionately rather affected by the everyday reality of all South Africans. Crime is a booming issue for all South Africans in the country, and we see this narrative being pushed by the Patriotic Alliance, by members of the National Coloured Congress, another political party in Parliament, to say that coloured South Africans are being forgotten. They look at what is currently happening in the ANC. They look at the DA and how majority of the DA's caucus in Parliament is white, and saying coloured South Africans are not being represented, coloured South Africans are not being looked after. There is absolutely no evidence to support that. The reason why gang-related crimes, and more specifically why crime at large in South Africa is a growing problem, is because of unemployment. And while, yes, for coloured South Africans, unemployment sits at 28%, for black South Africans, that is at 36%. And that is just the narrowed down definitions. If we had to look at the expanded definitions, those averages then increase to 44% for black South Africans. And so while absolutely gang-related murder, specifically in the Western Cape, is something that needs to be addressed and something that needs to be tackled, it is unfortunately not a unique disposition towards the coloured community. And I think the framing of Coloured Lives Matter particularly coming from the Patriotic Alliance, is actually quite hypocritical. When we look at the origins of the Patriotic Alliance, when we look at the funding links of the Patriotic Alliance, Mail and Guardian released a very detailed deep dive in 2016, detailing an article about how Gaten McKenzie had gang-related money to start the political party. And so when we look at a political party that has had known gang links more recently, Vice President of the Patriotic Alliance, Kenny Kunene, was also embroiled in a gang-related scandal, to have a political party who has gang ties to then advocate in colored communities that are disproportionately affected by gang-related crimes, because unfortunately the sad reality is that gangs, more particularly in the Western Cape, are predominantly colored, and they are killing colored South Africans. It is colored on colored crime, and I do not think that this framing, now throwing it back at the government, is useful at building what we want to be, the rainbow nation of South Africa. I think that there is a lot of race rhetoric that is borderlining racism, and I do think that we need to be very careful that while this is a unique issue that needs to be addressed, we saw 400 murders happening over the last quarter. It is something that needs to be addressed by the Western Cape Provincial Government, by the Minister of Police, but I think that the framing that is going on currently is extremely wrong.
Yeah. Bishop Adams, what's your response to that? The underlying crux of Tara's point is that colored people aren't uniquely neglected or marginalized, and that crime and related social inequities affect South Africans across the board, but more so, predominantly and more seriously so, Black South Africans, if you take into consideration unemployment stats. What's your response to that?
The unemployment stats, Tara is correct, for African blacks 30%, but for colors 25%. And if you look at the approximately 6 million, 6.5 million colors according to the stats, you would look at the unemployment, the pockets of unemployment of colored communities is quite bad. However, the lived experiences, all of us in our communities. I grew up in Noordwes and I grew up in Westbury. I understand what our people are going through. I have a church in Westbury. I understand what our people are going through. I see exactly the thousands of young people walking around aimless. It's correct. The unemployment issue is a exacerbator, and it is a driver of what is happening, because many of the young men that get involved in this gang violence and drugs is because they have no economic flow that comes into their family homes. The fact that they are, single parents, mothers has to look after their children is also exacerbated. But one cannot leave out the fact that the neglect of colored communities when it comes to other communities. I go to Soweto and I go to other areas. The development is much more than what it is in our communities. And I want to put to you to this day, and to Tara, if you look at housing in particular, no houses has been built in colored communities, predominantly colored communities, and we are integrated now. But in all areas there are houses that are being built. So you are having these high flats and that has been there for many years, and people are crammed together, and this has exacerbated the fact that violence has actually happened. And I want to agree with Tara that yes, it is colored on colored violence, but it's because there is drivers that allow this to happen, because there is nothing else for the young people to do, Oliver.
Are you not afraid, Bishop Adams, that the points that you're making seem to be anecdotal at best? That is to say, well, if you look at Soweto on the one hand, which is a predominantly Black African, well-integrated community, has a lot more development than, say, compared to its counterparts, I don't know, Regenpark in Noordwes. The comparison there is anecdotal at best, because if you look at other parts of the country, one could say that, look, it seems to be that advancements and development for colored people here have been taken a little bit more serious, right? Should we not perhaps look at what the empiricism says, empirical data points, rather than anecdotal observations?
Oliver, you've got to understand is that what we are saying is that government, maybe correctly so, focused on uplifting blacks because there was Black African areas, because there is the notion that colored people were more sort of advantaged than Black people. But I think the scales have tipped now. As we look 31 years down the line, the scales have tipped. And we are saying, and we're not saying we don't want the African Black brothers and sisters in their communities not to benefit. We are saying we want the colored communities also, when it comes to economic opportunities, skills development, employment equity, when it comes to sports facilities, when it comes to infrastructure, must also be looked at. So we're not saying deprive the others. We are saying equality in terms of also rolling out these programs in our communities. That's what we are saying.
Yeah. Tara, what's your response to that? The scales have tipped.
I completely and utterly disagree. When you focus the lens on Cape Town has the largest majority of colored South Africans by metro city rather, in the entirety of the country. 40% of the city is colored South Africans. The city of Cape Town has built more social housing than the city of Joburg, Ekurhuleni, and the city of Tshwane combined. The city of Cape Town, by midway through this year, built close to 5,000 social homes in the city of Cape Town. So the idea that there isn't development in colored communities is factually incorrect. And while I can understand, and this is a growing sentiment, particularly on social media where this Colored Lives Matter movement had picked up, is that colored South Africans have really struggled within themselves to say, you know what, we cannot reconcile post-1994 the stagnant social and economic position of the colored community. But my throwback to that is that colored South Africans only make up 8% of the population. Colored South Africans are a minority in a black majority of South Africa. And so when we look at things, arguments being made that colored South Africans aren't fairly represented in parliament, that's absolutely not true. There are 25 colored South Africans currently in the National Assembly, which is 6% proportional representation. When you look at arguments to say that colored South Africans aren't being served by the city of Cape Town or the city of Joburg, factually incorrect. And so you cannot use anecdotal lived experience to look at the national picture of the country. The national picture of the country is that while a small minority of Black South Africans have climbed the social and economic mobility ladder and have gone up into positions in government and positions in the private sector, that is not the reality for the majority of Black South Africans in the country. We see policies that the colored community are saying have failed them by the ANC have failed the Black majority. So this argument that colored South Africans have somehow been left behind is completely and utterly false. And I think it is doing more harm to the colored community to perpetuate this narrative than to rather take a step back and look at the facts and the national picture. There is absolutely zero evidence other than anecdotal stories to substantiate the arguments that are being made. And this is no way, particularly as a colored South African myself, to say that these lived experiences aren't something that needs to be looked at. Yes, we look at the Western Cape at large and we look at the social housing by the city of Cape Town, but there is a 600,000 backlog, and that is something that needs to be addressed. We looked at forced removals that happened in areas like District 6 and how only now there was starting to be land egress. And so while I think we can do two things at once, we can critique the failed systems while also not borderlining racist rhetoric to say, look at how Black South Africans have advanced, because that is not true. For majority of Black South Africans, they are in the same social and economic position they were today in 2025 where they were in 1990.
Yeah. Maybe just a last theme to explore here, Bishop Adams. Is it not perhaps more useful, politically so, to frame the conversation as one that says the government has failed poor South Africans, which are inclusive of a lot of colored people, rather than to say the government have failed colored people particularly?
All right, Oliver, never in the history of our democracy has anyone really spoken for the colored people. I think it's the first time there is a solidarity movement in terms of colored people coming together to say enough is enough. And it's not anecdotal. We are not here to say that we want to deprive our African, Black, or Indian, or white people of what they must get. Colored people are saying we also want our place under the sun. We want our piece of the cake. We are saying do what you must do for other communities and other races, but do not let the colored people be left behind. And we feel as colored people, and it is not racial, it is a reality. And I want to stress that point, that we know exactly what happens in our colored communities. We grow up there and we live there and we see what is happening. And we have programs that we roll out with the children. We have challenges.
Just Bishop Adams, just very quickly, the point Tara making is that the things that are happening in your communities as colored people are also happening in Black African communities. It's not a unique phenomenon.
Yeah, but they have to. Yeah, we also. I'm anti-race. That's what I am. I want to say that categorically. I don't believe in racism, but I think the time has come that we speak up. And we're not saying that if we say colored lives matter too, and we want colors also to get a place in the sun, that we're being racist. And why is it when colored people stand up and they speak for themselves that they are being seen as racist? And Tara is misinformed in terms of saying to us that we are bordering on racism. We're not bordering racism. We are saying our voice must also be heard. That's what we are saying. We are saying give to us what belongs to us and give to the others. We want everybody to get in South Africa what they deserve in this democracy and the rainbow nation that we all talk about.
Yeah. Tara, a minute left. Last take from you.
My concluding thought is that the notion that colored South Africans have never been properly represented is absolutely false. Trevor Manuel, one of the most notable ministers of finance, a colored man. Patricia de Lille, a long-standing politician in South Africa who was the mayor of Cape Town,
But
now
they
the minister
speak
of
for the
tourism.
colors. Never. Never.
What is speaking for the coloreds, though, and that's the point that I bring, is that even if you look in the city of Cape Town, majority of post-democratic Cape Town mayors who have rolled out social programs in a majority where the colored majority is the largest in the country have been colored South Africans, Patricia de Lille, Dan Plato. So this idea that now suddenly political parties like the Patriotic Alliance, the National Colored Congress are speaking up for colored voices. Colored voices have been spoken for. And I think this idea that 8% of the population can now suddenly claim that they are being completely discriminated against with absolutely no facts or evidence to back that up is completely blatantly false. And the idea that I cannot say, being a colored South African, knowing the rhetoric that is being spewed, saying that I'm completely false for saying it's borderlining racism, it is. Because unfortunately, the reality is the minute you start saying, oh, well, colored South Africans are uniquely oppressed to black South Africans, when that is not the case, the black majority is still in the exact same position as they were pre-1994, you then get into the logic of what is apartheid
Yeah.
thinking that colored South Africans are a step above black South Africans and somehow uniquely need to receive advantages or uniquely their circumstances need to be looked at differently to the majority of black South Africans. It is a collective fight. Everyone deals with unemployment, crime, affordability, and these are issues that are not unique to the colored community. And I think that it is a very harmful rhetoric to push that colored South Africans are uniquely and systematically oppressed by the current status quo and by the current government when that is not the case.
Sorry, Ross, we're going to have to leave it there. Bishop Dalton Adams, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate you joining me on the program this evening. We're going to take a short break.